All right, welcome back to the channel. My name is Coach Jordan Hargrave. So today we're going to be looking at an email that I just got. The subject line reads, "The test all come back negative, so why am I still stuck?" This person is dealing with some very severe depersonalization realization, and I'm going to be highlighting 5 different mistakes that he's making that's preventing him from recovery, and I want to make sure that you prevent these mistakes too. And so smash the like button if you're ready to crush depersonalization realization this year. Also, I did want to let you know, I've been having like severe allergies lately. And yesterday, I actually had to go home from work for like 4 hours. And so if you hear me being a little bit kind of nasally, and I'll try to pause it if I need to cough. But just to give that disclaimer, anyway, let's go ahead and get this thing rocking and rolling. So he says, "Jordan, I really don't know what to do anymore. I've done everything people say you're supposed to do." Well, as Joe Dirt would say, "That might be your problem. Snakes and sparklers," right? And then the guy's like, "Well, that's the only ones that I like." He's like, "You don't have, any Husker do's, Husker don'ts, with or without a scooter stick. Anybody know what I'm talking about? No?" Anyway, Joe Dirt's a really good movie. Anyway, with that being said, that might be your problem because, unfortunately, most people, while they are trying to help whenever they're posting online, "Hey, this is the cure, this is the cure," they're basing that off of their own subjective experience. And I remember whenever I was suffering with depersonalization realization, and I also had severe anxiety, there was one point I was having 20 panic attacks a day. And I was just desperate to find somebody that had been through the symptoms and beat them and could tell me how to recover. And I would see a video and somebody would be like, "Hey, this is what you need to do. All you got to do is this thing." And I would do it and it wouldn't work. And then I'd go to the next video and the next video. And I'd be up until like 3 in the morning just watching video after video. And it's because at that point, I didn't understand that while there are definitely things that everybody can do to kind of downregulate their nervous system that are going to be beneficial for everybody, recovery is very individualized. Okay. One thing that calms you may trigger the next person. One thing that triggers the next person may calm you down. And so, as much as I think that it's better than nothing to have people who have done different things to recover trying to help you, we really need to focus on 2 things. Number one, what does evidence shows? What have peer-reviewed studies shown to downregulate the nervous system? Then also, let's look at the individual factors that are influencing your nervous system. That's what I had to do with my own recovery, and that's what I do with clients. He says, "I don't avoid my life. I still work. I go to meetings. I still socialize. I travel. I exercise. I don't sit at home hiding. That's why this makes no sense to me." So this is a very common confusion that a lot of people have who don't avoid. Okay. So they're like, "Well, I'm just living my life. I've never avoided anything. It's not like I'm sitting in my house, on my phone all day or just staying in bed all day," which, if you are that person, don't feel any shame at all. That's a lot of the clients that I work with. But I also work with a number of clients, they don't avoid anything. Avoidance has never been their issue as far as avoiding sensory triggers. And there's a lot of reasons that is. They're just a very resilient person. They have a history of just kind of pushing through, muscling their way through. And the answer to all problems is just keep going, which can be very good, but also very bad when it comes to your nervous system. But here's what I tell those clients that I'm working with. You're physically present, but you're interoceptively absent, okay? So interoception is the experience of the embodied self. And this is a big part of how you're going to get rid of symptoms, is you have to start to pick up on what's happening in your body. And if you've been living in your head for a very long time, you're going to find that it's a war zone there. It's not a comfortable place to be, which is why you've been living in your head and doing everything you can to stay out of your body and also numbing your body. Because to experience your embodied self would be to feel tension, adrenaline, emotion, and fatigue. And so you learn to stay up here and just drink more coffee, just drink more energy drinks, and just push, 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 push. But we have to get you back in your body because that's a huge missing piece, even though you are doing exposure, which is good. And if I had a client who is avoiding, they're staying in their room, they're not living their life, that would be something that I would tell them to do is we need to face your triggers because whatever you avoid, your brain assumes as a lion trying to eat you. And I also have them couple exposure with body relaxation because it doubles the signals of safety that are being sent to the nervous system. But with that being said, just because you're living your life and there's all these people online that say that that's enough to recover doesn't mean that that's going to be enough for you. So we can check that box off. So if you came to work with me and you said, hey, I'm not avoiding any sensory triggers, I'd be like, that's great. That's one less thing that we're going to have to do. But we still need you to face your body and learn how to self-regulate effectively. And then there's other things we need to do as well. So we're at about 5 minutes and I want to pause for a second. I look at the analytics and between 5 and 10 minutes is where 90% of people drop off. I want to issue a challenge that's going to help you. I want you to watch this whole video, even if you have to watch it on 2x speed. Maybe you're already doing that. Even if you got to pause it and come back, because we're going to be covering a total of 5 mistakes that are going to save you so much wasted time and energy. I know that it's hard to watch videos that are kind of longer, but again, if you got to come back, that's fine too. But I want you to stay until the very end, okay? Because sometimes I don't get into the kind of the meat of exactly what you need to do until we get later into the video if I read these emails. So stick around and it will help you. So we've already went over. If you are avoiding sensory triggers, one of the things that you need to do to downregulate your nervous system is face those triggers, also couple that with body relaxation. But if you are living your life and you're not avoiding any sensory triggers, we need to do something called somatic exposure. So somatic means body, getting back into your body, and then also self-regulation, starting to listen to your body and relax the tension in your body, release the emotion in your body, okay? And whenever your body is saying no, you don't just muscle your way through, all right? So everybody's always like, well, what do I need to do to recover? That's one thing that you need to do. It's very important. It's all about communicating safety to the brain, body, and nervous system. I'm 41. I work in commercial real estate, and I'm objectively doing well. Long hours, high pressure, big decisions. I've handled stress my whole life. This doesn't feel like stress. It's hard to describe, but it's like I'm living through a pane of glass. Everything looks normal, sounds normal, but there's a thin layer between me and the world. I can see myself doing things, talking, working, laughing, but it's like watching a recording of my own life instead of being in it. I keep waiting for the moment I'll click back in, but it never really happens. Okay, so first of all, whenever somebody comes to work with me, one of the first things that we do is we take a look at their history. Okay, recovery really is not about going back into your childhood, going back into the past. I'm not saying that there's not a time to do that. But it's really more about the here and now. It's about doing things that convey safety to your brain, body, and nervous system in the here and now. That's a 21st century understanding of how to downregulate the nervous system. But I will say, looking back to your past in terms of like what were the factors that could have led to this can sometimes help peel the layer of fear and confusion as to how you ended up like this. See, most people, when they think of trauma, which is what causes depersonalization realization, they think of an event. Not just an event, but a very standard list of events. Loss of a loved one, car accident, going off to war, natural disaster, things like that. But this is a very antiquated 20th century understanding of trauma. And while that is the popular understanding, it's very outdated. We now understand that trauma is not an event, it is a state. It is a state of overwhelming stress in the brain, body, and nervous system. And once you reach that state of overwhelming stress, there are certain things that start to shift in your nervous system. You actually go into what's called the dorsal vagal branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is whenever your nervous system is going to start to prepare you to be eaten by a lion. Okay. According to the polyvagal theory understanding of the nervous system developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, the neuroscientist, whenever our brain perceives threat or there's an actual threat, the very first thing that we look to calm ourselves down is other people. And that's why a big part of healing your nervous system is a safe person that can help convey safety through a therapeutic relationship, building hope in you, things like that, validating your experience. But if that doesn't work, then we go into fight or flight response. That would be sympathetic nervous system. So the first is our social engagement system. That's the ventral vagal branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. Then we go into sympathetic nervous system. That's stress, anxiety, panic, fight or flight. But there's a certain point where stress escalates into traumatic stress. Our nervous system feels too trapped, too overwhelmed to fight or flee. That's when we go into the freeze response, also called the trauma response. That's the dorsal vagal branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. And there's all kinds of changes that are designed to prepare you to be eaten by a lion. So depersonalization, realization is not really the presence of something as much as it is the absence of something. It's actually a shutdown of what Dr. Bessel-van calls the mohawk of self-awareness. And so it's a series of brain structures that kind of resemble a mohawk haircut that kind of go ear to ear. And they're responsible for you feeling connected to your body, yourself, and your environment. Why would your brain do that? Well, if you are about to be eaten by a lion or some sort of apex predator, it would be a lot better if you didn't feel it. Okay. And so by shutting down these brain structures, if you are eaten, you're going to be a lot more numb and not feel as pain because you're not really connected to your body much. Everything feels fake and dreamlike. Also, the timekeeper, right? The part of your brain that's responsible for perceiving time in terms of beginning, middle, and end starts to be compromised. And also your memory gets fragmented. Perhaps, it's debated, but perhaps so that way, if you recall that situation in the future, you won't be so overwhelmed by it because you'll just be able to remember bits and pieces or nothing at all. This is called trauma memory. There is greatly diminished functionality in the prefrontal cortex, logical, critical, creative, contextual thinking, also attentional awareness. But anyway, basically, it's like the Titanic. The ship's going down, and dorsal vagal shutdown is a lot like the lifeboats, even though the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats, obviously. But it's basically, let's get you away from the pain. If you're going to be eaten, you might as well not feel it, okay? So anyway, with that being said, if you know what's happening, it's still terrifying, but it's a lot easier to kind of downregulate your nervous system. But if you don't know what's happening, and especially if you start to Google and see all these theories and fears about the symptoms, we actually add a layer of stress that becomes one of the many layers as to why we can't downregulate your nervous system. So a fascinating thing that I learned several years ago is that non-human mammals have the same basic nervous system as us, but they don't stay stuck in fight, flight, freeze response. In fact, they can go in and out of these responses sometimes dozens of times on a daily basis. Think like, a gazelle in the African savanna or something, surrounded by apex predators. But why is it that non-human mammals can exit these states of survival so quickly, and then we sometimes don't get out of fight, flight, freeze? Well, we're talking about it. It's because we do things that they don't do, and we don't do things that they do. We avoid sensory triggers, whereas non-human mammals will automatically live their life. We also attach a lot of fear to the safe symptoms of fight, flight, freeze, such as, hey, these represent that my brain is broken. These represent that I'm going crazy. These represent that I'm becoming psychotic or schizophrenic or this thing or that. In fact, one time I had a fear that my first DPDR episode was an epileptic seizure. Now, go to a doctor, okay? Very, very, very important that you get all of these things checked out. See a licensed mental professional. These things are very, very important. But the people that I'm working with, they've seen those people, okay? And they've gotten those things rolled out. But these aren't your fears, okay? But part of how we're going to fix this and do something called cognitive restructuring, which is where we renew our mind to the truth, is you've got to get a 21st century understanding of why your nervous system is overwhelmed. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, when you look at your history, maybe you didn't have a lot of these traditional traumatic events, even though trauma is not an event at all. But I'm looking at his job, and he says long hours, high pressure, big decisions. And there's something called complex trauma, okay? So don't judge me for this cuddle season mug. This is my wife's, and I'm 36, and I just grab whatever mug is available. Same thing with socks. I don't even care if they match at this point, as long as there's a layer between my feet and the shoe. But anyway, complex trauma would be more like the liquid slowly filling up, and then there's that point where everything escalates into overwhelm in your nervous system, and that's when DPDR shows up. especially if you've had a history of being in very stressful environments, or especially abusive environments. Not necessarily, but basically that's complex trauma. A major trauma is like, let's say your baseline of stress is relatively low. I mean, life is stressful, so maybe it's like a 1 or 2, but then there's a situation that overwhelms your nervous system. Okay, you go from like a 1 or a 2, or maybe let's even just say a 0 to an 11. Okay. That does happen sometimes, but typically, because those people don't have a history of significant stress or traumatic stress, and especially let's say that they do have good self-regulation skills, they've got lots of co-regulation from people around them. Most people, actually statistically 98% of people, can de-escalate their nervous system within 1 month or less when it comes to depersonalization realization. But 1 to 2% of the population, they continue to experience the symptoms for more than 1 month. So why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, but part of the reason is because you have a disproportionately more stressful history than a lot of people. And so you might have been walking around at a baseline of a 5, 6, or a 7, and you might have been somebody that's like, you know what, I was a very anxious person even before depersonalization realization showed up. Well, like if your baseline is a 6 or a 7, it doesn't take much to get from a 6 or a 7 to an 11, does it? Whereas the person that's like a 0, 1, or 2, it's a lot bigger of a leap. And it can happen. And I do work with people that they're like, yeah, my childhood was great. Early adulthood was great. Like, but this situation completely overwhelmed my nervous system. Yeah, that does happen. And the path would be the same for those people as far as recovery. We need to do things that communicate safety to the nervous system, but it's going to look different in terms of their history, okay? So another thing too, and we've already talked about it, is one reason that some people can get out of depersonalization realization quicker is because maybe they don't know what it is and they don't even try to know what it is. Sometimes, while knowledge is powerful, sometimes knowing too much to the point it becomes an obsession is a problem. Okay. It's one thing if you just get an education about why depersonalization realization happened. It's another thing if you're spending hours and hours and hours a day on Google and Reddit and YouTube, and all of a sudden you see all these people that have been suffering for 10, 20, 30 years, and you see all these theories about the symptoms, and all of a sudden obsession with DPDR becomes one of the primary layers as to why you can't de-escalate your nervous system out of the state of traumatic stress is producing the DPDR. Okay. Another thing, and this is due to a lack of education, is just fear of the symptoms. The symptoms of depersonalization realization, but also the other symptoms of traumatic stress, time feeling distorted, memory fragments, all this stuff, they're terrifying. And sometimes, in the absence of education, people are traumatized by the trauma symptoms. That was me. If you don't know what a panic attack is, and you don't have to have a panic attack to experience DPDR, but just to let you know, but a lot of people do. But I didn't know what a panic attack was. I thought I was dying of a heart attack after a bad marijuana experience. It felt real because my logical brain shut down, but then also you start to feel out of body. Everything around you feels fake and dreamlike. Time starts to feel distorted. Like, if you don't know why that's happening, and you don't have a lot of access to your prefrontal cortex, which is your logical brain, it's very easy to come to some very, very catastrophic conclusions. I was convinced that my friends laced the weed with something and it permanently broke my brain. I believed that for years, and I would just sit around for hours and hours like, why is this happening? Why are the symptoms happening? But I wasn't considering my history. I wasn't considering my grandma passing away in high school. I didn't deal with that at all very well. Severe, severe bullying growing up. My parents going through a messy, messy divorce, falling behind in school severely. I failed the 8th grade, and it just goes on and on and on. And so I now recognize that from the time that I was a kid, I was starting to dissociate in different ways. Dissociation comes from a Latin root word that means to sever or separate. I would constantly obsess over existence, constantly playing video games to separate, and 10,000 other things to numb my body and to stay in my head. I was just daydreaming, just off in the clouds. I was never present. And I realize now that my body was becoming a war zone very, very early. Like with bullying, even if I wasn't being actively bullied, I could be bullied. The bully could show up. And so my nervous system started to be hypervigilant. Whenever my brothers and I would be playing flashlight tag outside, which I forgive them, by the way, if they're watching this. I love you. But they would be like, shh, what is that? It'd be dark outside. And they'd be like, is that Bigfoot? I was terrified of Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and aliens. And I know it sounds silly, but I watched Jeepers Creepers, the movie Signs, and some, what was that alien TV show? I can't remember it. Anyway, I was terrified of that. And I know it sounds funny if you've never been afraid by that, but from a nervous system perspective, I was very, very, very anxious from probably the time that I was like 5 or 6 years old, okay? And so what I'm saying is my baseline was starting to become a 2 and then a 3 and then a 4 and then a 5, then a 6 and a 7. And so whenever I had the bad marijuana experience in 2008, my baseline was like a 6 or a 7. Plus, I thought I was stupid. I thought that I would never amount to anything. I remember when the college recruiters came into the school and they met in the library, which I went to a tiny school. There was only like 60 kids or maybe 70 or 80 that graduated my class. But I was like, there's no point in me going. I'm an idiot. I'm stupid. It turns out that actually I'm not an idiot. It turns out that you can learn how to think critically. And I've been able to acquire so many skill sets whenever I thought that I was stupid. But that was stressful. I didn't know where my life was going. And I kind of just wanted to space out and play Guitar Hero and smoke some weed. It sounded really nice. But for years and years, I thought that was it. And we're going to get back to I know we're rabbit trailing a little bit, but I want you to think about your history, okay? Think about the things that you've been through. Even if it's not loss of a loved one, car accident, natural disaster, going off to war, these things, just repeated stress and adversity over a period of time, that's complex trauma. So let's get back to it. The thing is, and here's a big mistake, okay? One of the first ones we're going to get to. We've already talked about a number of other ones, but thing is, I don't sit with this feeling either. I distract constantly. Podcasts, YouTube, calls, workouts, background noise. From the second I wake up until I fall asleep, there's something playing. Silence makes it worse. Or maybe I'm just scared of silence now. Okay, so there are a number of people out there that teach that distraction is a fundamental part of recovery. And they would say things like, hey, have you ever been distracted for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, and you weren't experiencing depersonalization realization? Well, in that time, you were fully recovered. And so if we can just spread this out over your entire day, then we have the answer here. And it sounds really good to the person who doesn't have a 21st century understanding of the nervous system. But this is something called somatic dissociation. Somatic means body. Dissociation comes from a Latin root word that means to sever or separate. It's literally a way to become so detached from your body that the circuit breakers of depersonalization realization shut off. Okay, I want you to see DPDR as like a circuit breaker in a house. Let's say there's a power surge, and the circuit breaker turns on to create disconnection to prevent overwhelm in the electrical system, so your appliances don't burn out, etc. And if you wanted to get the circuit breaker to shut off, you wouldn't want to directly address the circuit breaker, would you? You would want to stabilize the power, okay? As long as there's overwhelming power in the house, the circuit breaker is doing its job and creating disconnection. So maybe you call the electrical company and they have somebody come out and they stabilize the power, and then the circuit breaker turns off, and then you hear all your beep beep. I guess that's my impersonation of your appliances turning back on. That was the worst ever. But anyway, everything starts turning on. You never had to address the circuit breaker. And I know DPDR is terrifying. Depersonalization, realization were the most terrifying thing that I've ever went through in my entire life, okay? But they're appropriate. They're appropriate symptoms when your body is a war zone. But let's say, going back to distraction, that instead of stabilizing the power, you stepped outside of the house. You're sitting in a lawn chair in the yard. So maybe the circuit, which it's not a perfect analogy, obviously, but maybe the circuit breaker would shut off because you're not experiencing that power. But what do you think is going to happen the moment that you go back into the house if that power hasn't been stabilized? You're going to become interoceptive, experience your embodied self, and then bam, the circuit breaker is going to kick right back in. And for a lot of people that I work with, distraction was never powerful enough. Why? Because there's too much buildup in the body. Distraction is only going to work if there's like low to mild levels of stress in the body. Okay. For you to be able to override that through separation, through dissociation, going into your head, you can't have extreme amounts of tension, adrenaline, emotion, fatigue in the body. Okay. So with that being said, it's not a fix. And the people that think that they're recovered from that, I'm happy they're feeling better. My gosh, am I happy they're feeling better. Even just 5 seconds of relief. No matter how it happened, I'm happy that you feel that relief. But I've spent the last 8+ years working with people who did distraction and thought that they were recovered. And then by the time that they have so much buildup to the point that they can't distract away from it anymore, now we have several extra months of work to do. There's so much more buildup in the body. And also it's exhausting to distract your mind 24/7. It's like, no. I remember I was trying to distraction during my recovery. It's like, no, I can't talk. I got to distract. I was playing video games. I was playing Temple Run on my phone. It's like, no, this is going to cure me. It's exhausting. And it's not dealing with the root. You're not able to truly be present if you're constantly having to distract. So it's like the ends don't justify the means is what I would say. Okay. Just because somebody has their symptoms shut off temporarily, we can't make that the standard of recovery. The standard of recovery is that you've dealt with the roots as to why the symptoms were there to begin with, which in this case is overwhelming stress, emotion, and fatigue in the body. All right, let's continue. So it's a mistake. Don't distract. Face your body and learn how to self-regulate, okay? Whether it's with me or somebody else, do that. I've been to 3 different therapists. The first 2 had no idea what I was going through and referred me. Now, this lady says she has worked with people experiencing DPDR, but all we do is talk about my childhood, and I feel like I'm getting nowhere. We keep searching for some special event that I went through as a kid that is the reason I might feel this way, but my childhood wasn't bad. Nothing traumatic. I mean, my parents went through a divorce, but it honestly didn't affect me that much. Nothing that explains why I'm stuck in these symptoms. It just leaves me more confused, like we're digging in the wrong place. I fear that I'm investing all this time and getting nowhere. I keep coming back because I keep hoping we will find some sort of reason that these symptoms are here. Okay, so I just recently started working with a lady who's been suffering with DPDR for 50+ years, and she went to multiple licensed mental professionals, which you should do, okay? Even though there's a huge gap in understanding, I want to clarify, as a coach, technically, you need to work with a licensed mental professional. However, with that being said, there's such a gap in knowledge right now, especially as it relates to trauma, which is what produces DPDR, a state of overwhelming stress, and there's not an understanding of complex trauma. And this lady spent years going back into her childhood and trying to find a specific event that happened, and they never found it. And then she starts working with me, and I teach her about complex trauma. And she's like, you know what? Right before I started to experience depersonalization realization, I had a very stressful job. I went through this thing and this thing and this thing, and it makes sense. Again, going back to the cup overflowing, as to why everything built up. It was never a single event to begin with. It was slow building stress and adversity over a period of time. And guess what? She is starting to break free after 50+ years of suffering. I think the last time I talked to her, she's like 80% DPDR free. And so with that being said, unfortunately, most licensed mental professionals, at least the ones that my clients go to, still believe, and it's not their fault, it's just what they've been trained, that trauma is loss of a loved one, natural disaster, going off to war, things like that. But if you look even at the statistics of those events, there's a lot of people that don't walk away traumatized. So trauma is not the event, it's actually the person's individual nervous system response to that event based upon two factors. Do they have a history of significant stress or traumatic stress? And then also, do they have the presence of self-regulation skills? And then also, we look at complex trauma where it can be not just one situation, but repeated situations, especially environments that are very stressful over a long period of time. So anyway, I don't know much about this person's history, but definitely even just their job, um, high pressure, big decisions, long hours, that slowly but surely can start to build up your nervous system, even just that alone. Yeah, I've been to a doctor and they can't find anything. I've had blood work done more times than I can count, hormones, vitamins, everything normal. I've had a CT, or everything is normal. I've had a CT scan, a brain scan, same answer every time. You're healthy. They say it confidently, like that should settle it. But the fact that they can't find anything medically wrong terrifies me even more because it makes me think my brain is broken. If I'm healthy, then why do I feel like this? I don't feel panicked most of the time. I don't feel depressed either. I feel disconnected, flat, like my emotions hit a ceiling before they reach me. I'll close a big deal and feel nothing. No relief, no excitement, just awareness that I should feel something. Okay, so this is what I see with my clients. In fact, we ask that they see a doctor before they apply to work with us because we do want to rule out any sort of medical or neurological issues. But I know it's easy to think, well, it almost would be better if maybe I had some sort of disease or some sort of, thing that could be fixed medically. At least I would know why this is happening, but consider it a blessing. Consider it positive that they can't find anything because that tells us that we're dealing with natural stress in the brain, body, and nervous system. And we know what gets rid of that, okay? We need to do things that communicate safety to the brain, body, and nervous system. I teach my clients 5 foundations of safety. Number 1, self-regulation, starting to release the tension, adrenaline, and emotion from the body. The next is co-regulation. This is actually 45% of recovery according to hundreds of studies. This is validating your experience, building hope in you, guiding you through the ups and downs of recovery because rewiring the nervous system is very, very up and down. The next is exposure. We've already talked about that. The other thing is getting the right neuroscience. We've already talked about that. That detaches fear and shame from symptoms. I also teach my clients to make healthy lifestyle adjustments, sleep, nutrition, hydration. These things are very important, setting up boundaries in life. But the more that we do things that are specific to showing your nervous system that you're safe, the more that you will exit the states of fight, flight, freeze response, okay? So consider it a good thing that they can't find anything. Okay, so with that being said, all right, we'll stop there. There's a couple other things, but this is kind of a longer video, so we'll cut it off there. So I hope that you have learned what not to do and learned what to do. And if you're wanting some more information as far as going more in depth with these things that we talked about, make sure to look below and take the 5 shifts masterclass. It's a free masterclass that will show you the 5 shifts to rewire your nervous system out of fight, flight, freeze response. And also there's a link to apply to work with me and my team on there, okay? That is it. Smash the like button if this helped you, and let me know if you made it all the way to the end, if you are a soul survivor and made it to the very end. And I hope that you got some benefit out of that, and I will talk to you very soon. Also, of course, subscribe, join this family, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.